$16,000 people died that day, and 2,500 went missing.
Mommy!
For the rest, it was a lifetime traumatic incident. Many, many people lost everything. But the worst was yet to come. The earthquake created a power blackout at Fukushima Daiichi nuclear plant. The emergency generators started but did not run for long. The cooling pumps did not restart, and about 45 minutes later, the tsunami reached the nuclear plant. The entire nuclear plant quickly became out of control. Without the cooling pumps, the temperature of each reactor went off the chart. A multiple meltdown was threatening to happen. Starting March 12, 2011, one of the 6 reactor units exploded, followed not long after by 2 others, releasing an unprecedented amount of nuclear radiation into the air.
Fukushima is the world's largest ever industrial catastrophe. And within hours, it's clear that TEPCO, the company managing the complex, had no proper emergency plan. So that the CEO of TEPCO, as the Japanese say, he fell like a dog into the river. For 5 nights and days, he locked himself inside his office, refused any media appearances, did not communicate with his staff. This company was not prepared. Despite the extremely risky business, it was not prepared for the catastrophe that unfolded. And you can say that actually the catastrophe was worsened by the fact that this company had wrapped itself in silence. Things were made worse by the use of what is called the Keisha Club system. The Keisha Club system is embedded journalism. So the company had living inside the organization a team of journalists whose job was to present to the outside world, in a highly risky industry, to present only good news to Japanese media and the world.
According to multiple newspaper investigations, 2 agencies were involved in the cover-up: the Nuclear Industrial Safety Agency and the Ministry of Economy, Trade, and Industry. One is the government regulator, and the other is promoting the nuclear industry. They are also known as the nuclear village. Because this illegal collaboration also involves the media that relies on energy industry advertising, Japanese organized crime, cover-ups, and political corruption, some analysts refer to the nuclear village as the nuclear mafia. Japanese media was ordered to censor information. The Japanese government failed to protect its people.
That day, because all the train and subway was stopped, I was stuck in Tokyo. I live 3 hours away from Tokyo. And I couldn't go home. I couldn't call my family. And I stayed in that building that night with 100 other people who couldn't go home. And the TV was on that night. And we were around the TV watching the tsunami waves taking people and cars into the ocean. And I remember about maybe 9 or 10 o'clock at night, the announcer didn't say anything about it, but there was in writing, it said station blackout at Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant. And my heart clenched. Wow. That means it loses power and nuclear core will start to melt within, I don't know, an hour or 2. So I thought that night the Fukushima nuclear power plant is going to go melt down. And I still couldn't connect with my family. And I was thinking about evacuating, because if the meltdown happens, you don't know where the plume going to go. And I have small children. I don't want them to be exposed to radiation. And in the morning, at maybe 6, I went to the station waiting for the train to move. But no train was moving. And I had to search for information which train is moving. And I found one subway moving to another subway and going to my direction. And slowly I started making progress towards where my house is. And then I was able to connect with my husband, and we both agreed we should evacuate as soon as possible for fear of radiation coming to our way. But on TV, they said it's under control, and they kept saying that for 2 months. You know, the nuclear power plant was already melted and it even exploded, but they never admitted the meltdown until May. So people in Fukushima during that time were severely exposed to radiation because they have to go out, get water. Water was shut down, so they have to line up for the water and food. And women with babies, they are outside when the strong radiation was being emitted to them.
The day of the accident, the Japanese government ordered an evacuation within a 3-kilometer radius. After the first explosion of one of the reactor units, they expanded the evacuation area to 20 kilometers. On March 15th, after 2 more reactor units exploded, the government instructed residents inside the 20 to 30 kilometer radius zone to stay inside their houses. The radiation level around Fukushima Daiichi was precisely known but not released from the government. On March 15th, people were not aware of the highly radioactive particles spreading northwest of the nuclear plant by the wind and the rain. Also, because of many changes in government instructions, many residents around the nuclear plant were forced to move multiple times and were thus exposed to a very contaminated area with a radiation level 200 times higher than the background level. But for others who were evacuated in low radiation areas, within about a month, it was too late. They had already been exposed and contaminated.
I got to know Naoto Kan pretty well in the 4 or 5 times we've met here in the United States on speaking tours. And he said that, direct quote, "Our existence as a sovereign nation was at stake because of the disaster at Fukushima Daiichi." And I said to him, "Mr. Prime Minister, I think you did the right thing with the information you had." And he turned to me and he said, "The information I had was neither timely nor accurate." So the people that operated the reactor, Tokyo Electric, and his own regulators were lying to him.
2011年3月11日の福島原発事故、これはまず大きく言って2つの原因で、起きた原発事故でありました。一つは言うまでもありません。我が国においても歴史的に稀に見る大きな地震と津波、それによって福島第一原発の全ての電源が喪失をする、それが第一の原因であります。しかし実はもう一つ大きな原因がありました。それはこうした全電源喪失、あるいはこのような大きな津波ということを全く想定していなかった。そしてそれに備えての準備、ハードの面においてもソフトの面においても一切そうしたことに備えをしていなかったといういわば人為的な原因。
After the nuclear accident, Prime Minister Naoto Kan ordered all nuclear plants to be shut down for safety. He resigned from his position in August 2011 with the condition for his government to move into renewable energy and to rebuild the damages from this disaster. After his departure, he became an advocate against nuclear power. However, in 2012, nuclear advocate Shinzo Abe won the election and became prime minister. Not long after, in 2014, his government forced people back to their homes in supposedly decontaminated areas, or they would lose their government support.
The cruelty, the cynicism of this government, and one other thing I want to tell you for sure, that I found out, that nearly every member of parliament, leaders of the major political parties, executives of all the corporations have moved their families out of Japan. Shanghai is the largest community, Japanese community, outside Japan now. Hundreds of thousands of people there living in luxury apartments, while these same people are telling the people of Fukushima, go home. Okay? It's 10 kilometers from Fukushima. Go home, it's safe. While their families are overseas, in Los Angeles, in Paris, in London, and in Shanghai.
If it's safe, why they left? They tell us it's safe to live in Fukushima and to eat Fukushima food, and they promote eat Fukushima food to support the Fukushima people. There's a campaign by Japanese government. You know, you eat Fukushima rice or Fukushima produce to support, and people believe it. Like they have compassion for Fukushima people, so they want to support, right? And if the government do that kind of campaign, they believe it and they do it.
I was there in Fukushima, my first visit. I've been inside the Fukushima exclusion zone 10 times. My first time was in April. I went soon thereafter in June. I got radiation burns all over. It hurt right down to the marrow. You could feel it right down to the marrow of your bone. Your skin gets red and it leaves a lot of spots. So the contamination was very serious, and you could see it when I was walking down the street in Soma, the town of Soma by the coast north of Fukushima. She says, the sky has been so strange. It's so weird, the colors in the sky. And yeah, you can see these rainbow hues in the sky all over, very weird light. And this is all from radiation, those massive amount of radiation.
Another thing I feel about the Fukushima people and children is the medical society is trying to get the live data. They're doing big research on human research. You know, they usually use mouse or the animals for testing. They are testing humans, real life humans, and see what happens to long-term, low-level radiation.
At Fukushima Daiichi, the world is already seeing deaths from cancers related to the disaster. A TEPCO worker has recently been diagnosed with leukemia, and several others have also died of cancer already. And there'll be many, many more over time. The numbers we're getting about the exposure to the Japanese workers are distorted. On top of that, we're finding a huge increase in thyroid cancers in the surrounding population, on the order of 50 times higher thyroid cancer risks to children than would be statistically expected. It's a serious problem, and it's going to get worse. Unfortunately, the Japanese government's not telling us all the evidence. There's a lot of pressure on the scientists and on the medical community to distort the evidence so that there's no blowback about nuclear power.
In May 2012, the UN reported that aside from skin contamination of several workers, no clinically observable effects have been reported, and there is no evidence of severe radiation injury of the 20,000 workers who participated in TEPCO's effort to reduce the accident at the plant. In their final report in April 2014, they concluded that the rates of cancer or hereditary diseases on the population does not show any apparent rise because the radiation doses were too low. The most important health effect is on mental and social well-being because of the tremendous impact of the earthquake, tsunami, and nuclear accident, and the fear and stigma about the risk of exposure to radiation.
Numerous Japanese doctors who've told us that if they tell their patients what's really happening, that their illness or their cancer was caused by Fukushima Daiichi, they'll lose their hospital privileges and they'll no longer be able to practice medicine. There's also a thing in Japan called the State Secrets Act, and the Abe administration is actually capable of throwing scientists in jail if they publish information about these cancers. In the first year after the nuclear disaster, there were numerous studies indicating bloody noses were increasing in school. One teacher had 24 of his 25 students had bloody noses on the same day. Now that's not normal. And yet the Japanese establishment is attributing the bloody noses or the hair loss or the hoarseness in the throat to the stress from the nuclear accident, but not from the radiation. In fact, it's definitely all of these symptoms related to the radiation release from Fukushima Daiichi.
But what is radiation? Deep inside the center of every atom are tiny particles called protons, combined with other particles called neutrons, and surrounded by a shield of electrons, altogether creating an electric balance. Some atoms have the right ratio of protons to neutrons, while in others the ratio is wrong, making the atom unstable and creating radiation in the form of gamma rays, beta and alpha particles. Gamma ray radiation is a pure energy that causes disruption of the electron shield, which destabilizes the atom and its electric neutrality, causing the atom to become abnormal. When radioactive atoms touch a cell in our bodies, the particles released create a cascade of damaging changes within the cell and its electrical balance, resulting in collapse and death. If the radioactive atom is not removed, it will continue to damage cells around it. When these radioactive atoms get inside a cell, they contact and then damage the DNA, disrupting its electric balance, causing the cell to undergo pathological reproduction resulting in cancerous masses. At a low but continuous level of radiation, a cancer can take anywhere from 2 to 40 years to form, depending on the location in the body and the concentration level in tissues. At extreme contamination, the impact on tissues can cause death in a very short time. Let's look inside a nuclear reactor. An astonishing amount of uranium atoms are split every second in a chain reaction, creating a tremendous amount of new, smaller radioactive atoms. If these radioactive atoms escape, they are tremendously damaging to all life forms, humans, animal, fish, and vegetation. All nuclear disasters release monumental amounts of radioactive atoms into the atmosphere and into the ocean, potentially harming all life in their path.
Whenever you are taking in the forms of radiation that have come from the nuclear plants, parts of them are airborne, some of them are in water, some of them come into the soil, and as the energy comes off of these, they are damaging tissues, whether you're in physical contact with them or close to them or internally, will do damage to mitochondria, to the cell membranes, to the DNA in the nucleus itself. So all structures of cellular physiology are damaged by radiation.
Radiation experienced from nuclear power plants can mutate or damage a DNA molecule, which is a gene, damage it biochemically. That's called a mutation. In every cell, there's a gene that regulates the rate of cell division called the regulatory gene. And if that gene is mutated and the cell survives, years later, 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 years later, the cell will divide in an uncontrolled fashion into trillions of cells, and that's a cancer. We can't generally stop that cancerous growth, and the cancer cells spread all over the body. They infiltrate lymph vessels, blood vessels. One cell will rise from the prostate, be it a cancer, from the bowel, be it a cancer, from the breast, be it a cancer, up to the brain to cause secondary cancers. So a cancer is really a parasite. It survives, it thrives, the body decays, and then finally the body dies and the cancer dies.
Nuclear radiation symptoms are somewhat different. Many people will begin to experience hair loss. Others will find burning in the skin on the area that was exposed. Some will become nauseated. Some will go into gastric failure and they will begin to vomit blood. If there's a lot of neurological damage, they could have seizures. Long term, they can turn into cancer or dementia. The cells can go into atrophy. It just depends upon where they've been damaged, the type of radiation, and the cumulative effect.
And why do we have these atomic reactors and these atomic power plants? Every plant, when it operates, makes plutonium, and that plutonium waste is left. These lead all the way back to nuclear weapons, atomic bombs. And the atomic bombs are made from the waste of reactors. And there's no solution for what to do with any of this waste. It doesn't exist anywhere on the planet. Atomic power came as part of the Atoms for Peace program from the atomic bomb. And these atomic reactors, the industry said that electricity would be too cheap to meter. Atomic power is now the most expensive power there is on the planet. It is not feasible. It never has been, because the externalities, that's the financial term, for the costs that are not factored in, the cost of mining, the cost of making the uranium into fuel rods and shipping it and putting it in the plants, the cost of cleaning up the waste at the mine sites, and the chemical process that's done to leach the uranium out of the ground, none of that is factored in. At the end of life of a nuclear plant, it has to be dismantled, decommission is the process, and then supposedly store the waste. But where and how? There is literally no technology available that can do that permanently. It doesn't exist. And any organization that tells you, oh, we can store the waste for as long as we have to, the maximum amount is 100 years that these technologies will even work. There's one repository in Finland that claims 250 years. But the waste is going to be here for 250,000 years.
We're all seeing a global political agreement among the leaders centered in the UN organizations, the IAEA, United Nations, the World Health Organization, whitewashing all of this, the Environment Agency. All the international agencies are whitewashing what's happening in Fukushima. We take dosimeters and Geiger counters in there, we see a much different story. And you know, there's not many people who go in the exclusion zone, okay? I'm one of the few. Because if you want to stay overnight, bring a tent, and I tell you, at nighttime, when there's downdraft from the mountains, radiation rises by 3 times.
When I first joined the nuclear industry, I had looked at the atomic bomb and thought that the Atoms for Peace program was something that would change weapons of war into instruments of peace. In my role as a public relations rep for the nuclear industry, that I would be helping people around the globe, and especially here in the US. And I was wrong. I was really, really wrong. The things that I was taught simply aren't true. The things that I learned from the nuclear industry in the classes that I took with my journalism background, total untruths. And as we've learned from the meltdowns at 3 Mile Island, Chernobyl, Fukushima Daiichi, we learned that none of the systems the industry taught me were built in to protect our species, protect women and children, to protect life on this planet. They don't work. They failed. Some of the lies were that, for example, containments never leak. A containment built around the atomic reactor is put in place to prevent any radiation from escaping. Yet, it escapes every day as nuclear power plants operate. And then, when too much builds up, the operators often vent their reactors, or in the case of any kind of mishap in the reactor, they vent radiation to make sure that they don't explode like they did at Daiichi. So these containments, not only do they leak when there's a calamity happening, but they also leak on a regular basis. They just do not contain the radiation. The industry was based out of the Manhattan Project. So that was weapons manufacture. Much of it was done in secrecy. And a lot of the terminology is what I call nuke speak. There was even a book put out maybe 30 years ago called Nuke Speak. And it talks about the jargon the industry uses and how hard it is for people to understand that jargon. The expert witness testimony that we've done I'm very careful to make sure that we clearly define all these terms in lay language so that the average person, journalist, filmmaker, judge, jury, legislator can understand what is being said so the everyday person knows. And the industry has several times criticized us and tried to have our reports thrown out, saying that they're not technical enough. Yet all the technical information is in there. There was a special federal study in Germany that the politicians chose to do because they expected it to substantiate what the industry was saying, that nothing happened around nuclear power plants. But what they found was that within different circles around the plant, 3 kilometers, 6 kilometers, within distances, the radiation releases caused significant numbers of childhood leukemias. You could see it. In the US, the nuclear industry has fought consistently to not have that data made public. And the United States finally got funding, and they started through the National Institute of Health to do the same study that was done in Germany. Lo and behold, just a month ago, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission said it's no longer going to do that study. It doesn't have enough funding, and it has to shut it down. And my supposition, and the doctors I've spoken to and the scientists I've spoken to, is they're already getting data they don't want to make public. I was a reporter, and reporters don't really read. Their editors tell them, oh, this corporation just announced that they did X, Y, Z. Check it out, read the report. Well, the report is 450 pages. They can't decipher that. They don't understand the nuke speak. So they'll take a whitewash that the nuclear lobbyists have given to them. Nuclear Energy Institute is a big spokes company for the industry, and the media just repeat it and repeat it and repeat it. And no one can get the truth out. It's very, very difficult. The media, some media covers us now because we've created a reputation of speaking truth to power.
Following the disaster, during April and May 2011, more than 300,000 tons of radioactive water had been discharged into the Pacific Ocean. In July 2013, despite the repeated denial of leaks, TEPCO finally admitted that radiation contamination of groundwater had indeed been happening.
There's been massive dumping of water from Fukushima into the water since 2011, which continues, and the types of compounds, the ratios are changing, but still massively radioactive mix. Flows across the North Pacific, on the North Pacific Current, to around Vancouver area, British Columbia, where it splits apart. The northern branch going to the Alaska Current, and the southern going down the California Current, going down the coast to Peru, and the trade winds current across the Pacific to the Philippines. That whole cycle now has been completed. So we've got a whole cycle, circulation of radioactive water going around.
The airborne releases are relatively low at this point, but not zero. But now we're getting the water. And it's like a bathtub that has not been, the spigot has not been closed off on. The water that we are now seeing in the Pacific has traveled all the way from Japan, 5,000 miles. The Pacific's a big place and has diluted the amount of radiation, but it hasn't gone away. And it's going to continue until Fukushima stops leaking into the Pacific. The solution to reducing the amount of water, of radiation in the Pacific is to stop the leaks at Fukushima Daiichi. And the Japanese government has done a terrible job of that. And the international community has not stepped in and said, hey, let's all help here. They've left it to Tokyo Electric, the incompetent operators that caused the disaster in the first place, and the Japanese government to solve. And they've been very ineffective at stopping the leaks into the Pacific. So we're going to see bioaccumulation, which is how radiation lies on the sediment and gets absorbed and increased by seaweed. Something eats the seaweed, gets absorbed by a little fish. Something eats a little fish, gets absorbed by a bigger fish. We're going to see these radiation levels bioaccumulate up the food chain for years until they stop the leaks at Fukushima Daiichi.
You know, fish swim thousands of miles. So no one's testing the fish on the west coast of Canada or America. Fish could swim down to Australia. You don't know you're eating radioactive fish because you can't taste, smell, or see it. So it's a silent, insidious, cryptogenic killer.
When I went to school, there was this concept of dilution is the solution to pollution. And the Japanese are saying that by releasing huge amounts of radiation into the Pacific, it's being diluted out and no one's in danger. That's wrong. There will be thousands of people in the Pacific Basin who die of that radiation over the life of the radiation, which is 300 years. The issue really is that they won't be able to say it's you who had cancer. They can spread out the exposure over a large enough population that they won't be able to identify who it was who died. But that people will die is certain, and that it'll be tens of thousands of people around the Pacific Basin is also certain. Everybody knows that, and nobody wants to talk about it.
There is no safe level of radiation. I repeat, there is no safe level of radiation. Each dose of radiation you receive is cumulative and adds to your risk of getting cancer. That's absolutely documented in the medical literature. But the nuclear industry will say, well, there are safe doses, and they're even saying, well, a little bit of radiation is actually good for you, and that's called the theory of hormesis. They lie and they lie and they lie.
In 2015, marine scientists found that the radiation from Fukushima had reached the west coast of Canada. Despite the low level found along the coast, the unanswered question remains. In the long run, how much of this low-level radiation could harm marine life and human life? And since Fukushima is still leaking, what about the accumulation of radiation that will increase in the years to come? Scientists and oceanographers found tuna with traces of Fukushima-related contamination across the Pacific on the shores of the United States. Aside from the leakage and dumping into the ocean, since 2011, Fukushima Daiichi has accumulated more than 1 million tons of wastewater, stored in more than 1,000 tanks on the land of the nuclear plant. It ran out of land for water tanks by 2022. It has been suggested that the government could have solved the problem by allocating more land surrounding the power plant for water tanks, since the surrounding area had been designated as unsuitable for humans. Regardless, the government was reluctant to act. On April 13, 2021, the cabinet of Prime Minister Suga unanimously approved that TEPCO will dump the stored water into the Pacific Ocean over a course of 30 years starting March 2023. Many scientists and experts around the world are condemning Japan's solution, saying that it will create a bigger disaster, a threat to marine life and ultimately human life. In an official statement from an expert panel in August 2022 to the Japanese government and TEPCO, it was said, the Japanese government's intention to dump its radioactive water into the ocean is very inadequate. There is no scientific basis that could say that the effect on the ecosystems will be minimal. The idea of dilution being the solution to pollution is outdated and not true anymore. Other nations are also very concerned about Japan's plan. In 2022, at the Pacific Islands Forum Leaders Meeting held in Fiji, Pacific Island countries expressed their concerns about it. In Vanuatu, for example, an archipelago of 83 islands in the South Pacific, opposition members of parliament made a call for the Vanuatu government to protest against Japan's intention to contaminate the Pacific Ocean, from where their people get much of their sustenance.
There is something all Pacific Island countries share, and it is the ocean. When something happens at the other side, we are also affected. So I believe we have the right to say no to the Japan solution. We can't let them jeopardize our sustenance and our livelihood. Our people here are surviving mainly on the land, but also out of the ocean. So for the sake of our people, our country, and the sake of the Pacific Island nations, we ask Japan to reconsider what they are about to do.
Until a solution is found that can neutralize any radiation that we have created, nuclear energy is not sustainable. But we are not there yet, if we ever will. Some scientists around the globe are working on solutions. nuclear scientist Randy Milkey believes he can clean the radioactive wastewater at Fukushima.
What I've designed is what we call a bio-optimized bioremediation system. One of the greatest benefits of biofilms is its ability to capture heavy metals or contaminants in a specific environment. When you take toxic water and flow it across biofilms, those toxins are absorbed by the biofilms, and what you get at the end of this biofilm stream is clean water that has removed all of that contaminant that was in that original water source. And that's what's great about the BOB system, or the bio-optimized bioremediation system that I've designed, is that you can take this to any site and grow with the consortium of bacteria that are already there and give them a surface to grow on, and then you can remove the contaminant from that water source and then ultimately harvest that biofilm, and then you take that contaminant and make it into a hazardous waste. We went through 2 years of back and forth trying to prove our technology, our BOB system, for use at Fukushima, for cleaning up the water that was being used to cool down the reactor. One of the main reasons they didn't use it was because during that time, a crack occurred in that water system and the water went out into the ocean. And so they basically stopped all talk with us after that water was gone, and they didn't have any use for my system anymore because it wasn't there anymore. The water going into the ocean is coming from upstream. And so you have water flowing across the site underneath it. All the soil is contaminated, so it's flowing that direction. But they have water that they're pumping in from the ocean, that they're cooling down the reactor all the time. And they're taking that water now and putting it into 10,000 gallon barrels and stacking them on the beach. And this is where I would like to see my technology applied, is to clean up that water sitting there and not throw it in the ocean again, but clean up that water with the bio-optimized bioremediation system that can remove that radioactive nucleotide from the water, isolate it in biofilm, and then turn it into glass bricks where it doesn't impact environments ever again.
I got out of college in 1972. And by 1980, there was already one atomic meltdown at 3 Mile Island. And then in 1986, there was another meltdown at Chernobyl. And then there was a period of 2 decades where there were no new meltdowns, until in 2011, we had 3 meltdowns at Fukushima Daiichi. So that's 5 meltdowns in my career. So 5 meltdowns in 35 years is a meltdown every 7 years, roughly. Or essentially once every decade, the world needs to recognize that there will be an atomic meltdown somewhere. It might be in France, it might be in Russia, it might be in the US. But statistically, we know that roughly once every decade, based on the evidence of the last 40 years, we're going to have a meltdown every decade. The nuclear industry is saying they would like to build as many as 5,000 new nuclear plants, or 10 times more nuclear plants than we have today, which of course makes the problem of what are we going to do with this hot radioactive fuel for 250,000 years 10 times more difficult.
Fukushima Daiichi has shown the damage that can be caused by an earthquake and the subsequent tsunami. And that earthquake was miles and miles out at sea. I'm not just worried about what radiation is coming from the continuing operation, but I'm worried about the disasters and the meltdowns that have happened, beginning with Windscale back in 1957 in UK. That was one of the worst nuclear disasters. Or here in California, the San Susana reactor meltdown, that was never publicized. The Department of Energy covered it up. And all of this radiation constantly. There have been so many nuclear reactor meltdowns, atomic reactor meltdowns. It's mind-boggling. And most of them have been covered up. And then there's the issue of waste abandonment. Many of these plants that are being dismantled and they're attempting to store waste don't have enough money to even take care of the plant for 20, 30 years, let alone this an astronomical 250,000 years that this waste needs to be monitored, protected. How are we going to do this? We shouldn't be making any more waste.
Hopefully, the world will come to its senses and realize that renewable power is no longer alternative power. It's on the doorstep, it's here now, and it works, and it's cheaper than nuclear. A windmill produces power at about 3 cents, a solar array at about 5 cents, but a new nuclear plant produces power at 15 cents. Why are we doing this? It makes no economic sense. And hopefully Wall Street will say the same thing and refuse to fund these new nuclear power plants in the future. But we're all stuck with this legacy of what to do with 450 mistakes that we made over the last 50 years.
If I was going to say anything special to people around the globe to hear, I would say, I'm a woman, and I feel that it's inherent to us as women to protect our children, our grandchildren, and it's our job now to raise our voices to have this madness stop. I want to bring this planet back to a peaceful place. We have war on every continent. We need to plan for peace, and we need to plan a future for the generations that we're bringing into this world. Clean water, adequate food, and an environment that they can breathe the air and run in the sunshine. I want that for these children.
Ladies and gentlemen, the decision is ours. Never have the nations of the world had so much to lose or so much to gain. Together we shall save our planet, or together we shall perish in its flames. Save it we can, and save it we must. And then shall we earn the eternal thanks of mankind, and as peacemakers, the eternal blessing of God.